Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. This is the first part of a new little video series on authenticity. I begin with the story. Rosemary Brown was an English composer and a spiritualist in the 20th century. She wrote hundreds of pieces that were pastiches or tributes to some of the famous composers of the piano repertoire, including Chopin, Beethoven, Liszt, and more. Many of these are very sophisticated in how they copy the composer's styles, and they pay tribute to them. Why do I mention Brown at the start of a series on authenticity in music? Because she claimed that these pieces were actually by these composers. She was a spiritualist, a spirit medium. Whatever your views or beliefs about spiritualism, it is a bit of a jump to believe that the spirits of these composers communicated entirely new pieces to Brown, but she insisted that that was the case. She claimed that Liszt could control her hands for a few bars at a time and that she would write it down, or that Schubert would sing to her, and so on. She said that all of the composers spoke to her in English, having learned the language in the spirit realm. The pieces themselves are well constructed, but they would be entirely unremarkable if it weren't for the ghostly backstory that goes with it. For a small portion of her audience, Brown's compositions were genuinely by these composers that she communicated with. As soon as anyone wanted to argue that they weren't what they were presented as, and instead the work of a supremely skilled imitator, then their appeal and allure was gone. This, in essence, is the strange appeal of musical authenticity. The way audiences, critics, listeners attach realness or value to any particular music. In this series, I'm going to present a few different case studies, 3 different examples to examine this phenomenon across different genres. So let's get into it.
Look in my eyes, what do you see? A cult of musicology.
Have you ever heard someone say that a song that they like is real or true, or that songs come from the heart? These are terms we use when we judge music's value by how authentic we assume it to be. And it doesn't just apply to songs either. There are different values of authenticity across musical styles, some bound up with that murky thing, the composer's intentions, some bound up with audience concepts of the ideal performance, and still some further bound up with perceptions of community, race, and identity. I can't possibly address all of these even in a short series, but I'm going to present a few case studies that illuminate how the discourse of authenticity is used to celebrate or condemn different performances, artists, and sometimes even entire genres. When discussing popular music, some people love to pride themselves on following a group before they were famous, and then when they become popular, they use the dreaded phrase, "they've sold out." What does such a phrase tell us? In so many ways, it tells us more about the person saying it than it does about the artist or band. Much of popular music exists to make money. That's not a bad thing in itself, but disowning a band because they have moved into the mainstream is itself a kind of rejection of the reality that popular music can be a source of profit. It's a statement of authenticity, that artists who supposedly are motivated by their art only are somehow better than those who are also considerate of making a living. I start with examples from popular music, because these are some of the most personal and passionate judgments about authenticity. Popular music commands a colossal emotional power, because for many people, it is the music of their formative years. We literally construct our identities, including the music that we listen to, and what that music says about us and our lives. When an artist or band changes direction, that can be deeply upsetting. Imagine if you've built your identity around songs and an artist who then becomes rapidly different. This is partly why people get so angry, like when audience members shouted "Judas" at Bob Dylan in the 1960s. Those are deeply personal examples of authenticity and value judgments in music. But it's also interesting to compare how different genres of popular music can have radically different attitudes to what is and what isn't authentic. Take, for example, the relationship between live performance and studio recording. In some of mainstream pop, with pop icons and boy or girl groups and megastars, fans often expect the live performance to recreate the studio recording very closely, or as closely as possible. In some genres, it's perfectly acceptable to have backing tracks for most of the recording that a smaller group of performers then perform over in their live performance. In a handful of situations, it's considered fine and okay for artists to completely mime over a recording when performing, and that makes sense. Live performances in those genres are often about an entertaining spectacle, with costumes, dancing, and so much else besides. To get that perfectly, it makes sense to then have a recording that you perform over. In other genres, there's completely the reverse attitude. In much of rock, and especially folk, there's an authenticity that values studio recordings as being as close as possible to the live performance, so with minimal editing or studio trickery in the way. In these genres, live performance is more about introspective self-expression, with an aspiration to get as close as possible to the artist. These are just two examples. There are so many others to choose from. I'm going to highlight one key study on authenticity in popular music, which gives us a useful framework to analyse popular music, that from Allan Moore and his levels of authenticity. Using the terminology from grammar, Moore theorised 3 levels of authenticity. First person authenticity, in which an artist is authentic to themselves and what they want. Second person authenticity, in which the artist is authentic to individual listeners. And third person authenticity, in which the artist is authentic to a group or an entire community. In the 1990s, some scholars began to argue that authenticity no longer mattered in popular music, since the irony and detachment of 90s pop meant an embrace of kitsch and anything seen as tacky. As the decade wore on, though, it became apparent that if anything, attitudes to authenticity only doubled down. That's maybe a subject for another video, but you might like to think about how do attitudes in today's pop music relate to authenticity and ideas of realness, value, and what is true. Okay, that's enough for today's introduction and case study. I'm going to have more of these videos with different examples, some from European-derived classical music. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, tell your friends, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!